first experiment with gassing children or people.
Schloss survived Auschwitz concentration camp at 16, but most of her family were annihilated by the Nazis, along with 6 million Jews. And now, more than 70 years after the attempt to exterminate so many human beings, she's faced with young people who think Nazi symbolism is all the rage.
How hurtful it was for many, many survivors of the Holocaust who have lost millions of their families all over the world, really, you know. I mean, it is an insult to those people.
Insult to you?
Yes, insult to me as well.
And lastly, are you afraid, now that you've seen young people doing this over and over and over again here in America, are you afraid for the next generations of people?
Well, there's so much education going on now, and it's going to be improved. It's going to be more and more. And I hope that eventually they will see the light that it is not anymore acceptable. I'm still an optimist, you know. I think it can't go on that people do such evil acts. It must not happen, and it will not happen.
Eva Schloss did tell us that she was indeed shocked that in 2019, in a well-educated town with highly educated students, that incidents like this still occur. But when you speak to experts, they say that it will continue to occur across this country and abroad unless there is a strong push for education, not just by the school system, but by parents themselves and politicians as well. Back to you.
Sarah Seidner, thank you. Still ahead, getting closer to Brexit. The more uncertain we are about what it looks like, will it happen? These
Severe weather is headed for the southern United States yet again.
And our meteorologist Derek Van Dam is here to tell us about it. Derek?
This is after the unusual and extraordinary amount of tornadoes that occurred last weekend on Sunday that unfortunately caused 23 fatalities. And this one particular tornado in Lee County, that's near the border of Alabama and Georgia, that moved through the region on Sunday afternoon, was on the ground for over 70 miles. That was an incredible and very rare thing to happen. That's why it caused so much destruction and unfortunately the fatalities. This is just a recap of what took place last weekend, and the reason I bring it up is because today we have yet another chance of severe weather. But the good news here is that we're going to focus our attention away from the areas that were hardest hit last weekend. But that doesn't mean or belittle what's happening here or potentially happening across western Tennessee into northern Mississippi and extreme northwestern Alabama. That's where the hot spot is later today. We'll look out for that possibility of isolated strong to severe thunderstorms, some of which could spawn some tornadoes. Now, in the month of March, we typically see about 78 tornadoes across the entire U.S. Texas takes the reign there, 11 tornadoes on average for them. But you can see the deep south, including Florida, has a high frequency and a high number of tornadoes this time of year as well. We're starting to get the clashes of season taking place. Cold air from the north, warm air from the south. We already have a line of thunderstorms moving across northeastern Oklahoma. That will enter into portions of Missouri and Arkansas within the next few hours. Severe storms lining up thanks to that low pressure system that continues to move through the area. Now look at the forecast radar. You can see that line just erupting later this afternoon. We get the daytime heating from the sun. That's where we start to focus our chances of severe storms. Now, the severe storm threat diminishes as we get into the day tomorrow, but nonetheless, we still have the probability of storms right along southern Georgia into the Florida Panhandle. Believe it or not done with this storm system just yet. There's another possibility, another threat of extremely heavy snowfall across the northern plains. Today in Minneapolis, we could pick up 8 to 12 inches of snowfall, which is more than their monthly average for the entire month of March. Look at the snow just wrapping throughout that area. An incredible amount of snow that has the potential to bring this city to a halt. In fact, they have had an extremely snowy season so far this year, but with upwards of a foot of snow expected, you can imagine that they're going to want to say goodbye and good riddance to winter because, wow, it is just the winter that never ends. The good news is we do have a bit of a warm-up along the East Coast, so if you are in New York today, D.C., temperatures will feel a lot better than what they did earlier in the work week, and into next week as well. I think we'll see some of those temperatures rebounding nicely across the Great Lakes, my home state.
You know, George and I was just like, our mouths dropped open when you said that tornado was on the ground.
70 miles. Yeah, that's why it's so rare to see that. It was the worst tornado in Alabama since 1932. Very rare.
Wow.
Goodness.
Derek, thank you. All right.
And we will be right back.
To leave the EU, and there's still far too much uncertainty about how, and Natalie, even if Brexit will happen.
And they have talked about it and talked about it and talked about it. And Britain's Prime Minister made that point clear on Friday, saying if her deal is rejected in the next meaningful vote, all the worst case scenarios are possible.
Next week, members of Parliament in Westminster face a crucial choice: whether to back the Brexit deal or to reject it. Back it, and the UK will leave the European Union. Reject it, and no one knows what will happen. We may not leave the EU for many months. We may leave without the protections that the deal provides. We may never leave at all.
Our guest is here to talk with us about it. Andrea Leadsom is a Conservative MP. She's also Lord President of the Council and leader of the House of Commons, joining us on a breezy day there in London, and we really appreciate it, Ms. Leadsom. Thank you. Well, we just heard Theresa May outline worst case scenarios, and none sounded that appealing. Which case might be realistic?
Well, what we're completely focused on is winning that vote on Tuesday, and the government is flat out trying to agree with the European Union the final piece of the jigsaw puzzle that we think would enable Parliament to support it, and that is to achieve alternative arrangements to the backstop that protects the Northern Ireland-Irish border, and to enable the UK to be able to exit that backstop should the future economic relationship talks break down irretrievably. So that's our very clear mission, and if we can get that agreed with the European Union over the next few days, then there's a good chance that we can win the vote on Tuesday. But as the Prime Minister says, if we don't win the vote on Tuesday, then it could get very messy.
And very messy for whom? We've seen so many stories. CNN has done so many stories with people in various cities and towns are so confused about their future. And it's hard for anyone to be able to tell them what that future might look like.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely true to say that many people I speak to in my own constituency and around the country are just desperate for us to get on with it. You know, the people of the United Kingdom took a very clear decision in 2016 that they want us to leave the European Union, and we do, all of us politicians, need to just get on with it and deliver on that referendum.
Well, I have heard you say that if the deadline isn't reached, that perhaps you can go to the EU and ask for an extension. Is that a possibility still?
Well, it is a possibility, but if we ask for an extension, first of all, it requires all of the EU 27 remaining members to agree to it. And of course, individual EU member states might want to put conditions on that, which might not be acceptable to the UK government. And secondly, what would be the purpose? So if nothing has changed and we still haven't achieved the agreement that we need with the European Union, then simply extending the deadline for no purpose merely shifts that, it just kicks the can down the road. It still gives us the prospect of leaving without a withdrawal agreement just a few months later. So it's very hard to see what the purpose would be of an extension unless something has changed.
And if Brexit falls apart, if nothing is decided on, what beyond that? Could that give rise to a third party?
I mean, it's very difficult to sort of speculate beyond next week. I mean, the government is totally focused on winning the vote on Tuesday, and we are in very close, careful negotiations with the EU, and we're still hopeful of achieving that. And obviously beyond that, different outcomes are possible. I mean, there are those in Parliament who would like to overturn the decision of the referendum and have a second referendum. There are those who just want to extend. There are those who want to try and negotiate a different deal. I mean, there are various different groups within the UK Parliament who would like to see different outcomes. But what the government wants to do is to ensure that we get the Prime Minister's deal through on Tuesday.
It seems still that anything can happen at this point, and we'll wait and see what does happen Tuesday. Andrea Leadsom, we really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
CNN and people around the world are teaming up to make March 14th the day of action against modern-day slavery.
We are asking, what makes you feel free? Students at the Raha International School in Abu Dhabi answered by making this video.
The ability to choose makes me feel free.
Being able to be myself.
Being able to express my feelings and my thoughts.
Be able to be myself. Being able to express yourself freely.
Freedom is the ability to express your ideas.
The ability to say I without being criticized.
Without feeling any judgment.
Do the activities that I like to do.
Hanging out with my friends and expressing different feelings with them.
Basically being able to do the things that I enjoy and being able to express myself.
To share what you want to express yourself with.
In a society where there's so many different people.
Being able to make your own choices without feeling ashamed of making those choices.
What makes me feel free is expressing my opinion. When I'm hiking, when I'm skateboarding.
Being able to do something that I have a passion for non-stop. That's it.
Tell the world what makes you feel free. Share your story using the hashtag MyFreedomDay.
All right, also a major milestone to tell you about for a Japanese woman at 116 years old.
What was that?
116 years old. Look at that. Kanai Tanaka is the world's oldest person according to the Guinness World Records.
The supercentenarian normally wakes up at 6 in the morning. In the afternoons, she studies math and likes to pass her time playing the classic board for the second Trump-Kim summit. New images suggest North Korea may be preparing a rocket launch. CNN's Will Ripley joins us to fill us in.
Plus, blackouts across Venezuela as power outages leave people vulnerable. The Maduro government points the finger toward the United States. Also this.
Cities around the world celebrate International Women's Day, some even making it a public holiday.
We are live from CNN World Headquarters in Atlanta, and we want to welcome our viewers here in the United States and all around the world. I'm George Howell.
I'm Natalie Allen. CNN Newsroom starts right now. And we begin with potentially troubling news out of North Korea.
That's right. Just over a week since the Trump-Kim summit collapsed, new satellite imagery seems to indicate that Pyongyang is in the final stages of preparing for a new launch. At this point, it's not clear if this is a military launch or space in nature, a mission to launch a satellite. Still unclear, though.
Either way, it is problematic. The U.S. would regard any type of launch as a betrayal following the disastrous meeting between President Trump and Mr. Kim.
Let's get right over to CNN's Will Ripley. Will has been to North Korea 19 times, has covered that nation extensively, and now joins this hour in Beijing. Good to have you with us. Will, let's start with the very latest on the satellite imagery. What does it show us?
So we're seeing activity on two different sites inside North Korea. One, a missile and rocket factory outside of Pyongyang in Sanum-dong, where we know that intercontinental ballistic missiles have been assembled and space rockets that are used to launch satellites have also been assembled. And two analysts I've spoken with say that activity at that factory seems to indicate something was assembled, put on a rail car, and that rail car has now left the station, possibly headed, and still we don't know until it arrives, but possibly headed to the Sohae satellite launch facility, which is now, according to analysts, although not confirmed yet by the U.S. government, fully operational after a flurry of work in the last few days, work that occurred post the Hanoi summit when President Trump walked out of Kim Jong-un. Now, we know that there was some work happening at the launch facility beginning around February 22nd, but it has really picked up, analysts say, in recent days after that humiliating walkout by the United States that left the North Koreans empty-handed and having to go home with nothing. So if you put all the pieces together, they put together something at a launch, factory. Now they're taking it potentially to a launch site. It indicates that North Korea may be preparing for some kind of launch, either a space rocket or an intercontinental ballistic missile, possibly in the near future. Or this could all be a show for the benefit of spy satellites to send a very strong and defiant message to the United States in the wake of really a disappointing and humiliating end to the summit in Hanoi.
Well, I'm curious to ask you more about the North Korean reaction to that summit. What more are you hearing from the North Korean leader? What might that mean for people in that nation?
Well, we haven't heard anything directly from Kim Jong-un at this stage, but what we have seen just in the last 24 hours is North Korean state media take a really strong pivot in terms of their messaging about what happened in Hanoi. In the lead up to the summit, it was glowing coverage because the North Koreans, my sources say, were very confident that they were going to have a favorable deal signed at the end of the Hanoi summit after sit-down talks with Kim Jong-un and President Trump. My sources say the North Koreans didn't have a backup plan. They didn't have a plan B for when President Trump walked out and left them without a deal. So there was this hour-long documentary Inside North Korea still painting the overall Vietnam trip in very glowing terms. But now this new state media coverage, not only for the first time acknowledging that Hanoi fell apart, that it ended unexpectedly without an agreement, but also placing the blame for that squarely on the United States. And this could be an attempt by the North Koreans to shift their messaging internally for their own people to prepare them for what may lie ahead, which some analysts fear is a shift to a more militaristic posture after the embarrassment in Vietnam.
And Will, I remember from your travels there, the imagery, the signage changes in North Korea when that pivot happens. So, of course, we'll continue to monitor that. Speaking on that, sanctions, Will. What do sanctions mean in that nation? Clearly, North Korea wants sanction relief. How big of an impact have sanctions had so far, and how much pressure is it putting on the North Korean leader and on people there?
So the reports that we're getting from inside the country are that sanctions are having a crippling effect, and that is why it was so important for the North Koreans to get some of those sanctions lifted in Hanoi. They were making the argument that the sanctions are interfering with everyday citizens' livelihoods and could perhaps lead to even more grave complications in terms of the food supply and whatnot down the road. And so from the North Korean perspective, they really need the United States to lift sanctions, and that is an incentive for Pyongyang to work with Washington to try to strike a deal. And they have to know that if they do launch something, even if it is a space rocket, which North Korea claims is for scientific purposes, not a missile, which would be for, obviously for military purposes, a space rocket still uses banned technology by the UN Security Council, technology that could be used in the kind of missile that could hit the United States. And so North Korea has to know that any kind of launch, rocket or missile, would be highly provocative. However, there's also a lot of pressure, undoubtedly, on Kim Jong-un to save face after being snubbed in such a, really public way by President Trump, particularly just canceling the working lunch they were supposed to have together when the table was already set. It's hard to explain how big of an affront to Kim Jong-un's dignity that would be perceived inside North Korea. And it's not something that they'll soon forget, and perhaps they feel the need now to show the United States, that Kim Jong-un remains, in their view, somebody who's strong and willing to stand up to President Trump.
Will Ripley with perspective and reporting. Will, thank you.
The aftermath of the summit in Vietnam may be felt in the trade talks with China.
Sources close to the negotiations tell CNN Chinese officials are no longer planning for President Xi to travel to the United States later this month for talks. He's apparently concerned that President Trump could walk out just like he did at the Vietnam summit.
China reportedly wanting any deal to end the trade war to be all but hammered out before he reaches the U.S. In the meantime, U.S. and Chinese negotiators still talking with one another.
President Trump is currently at his Florida resort for the weekend, but he left Washington after another week of unprecedented turmoil.
His ex-campaign manager, you probably know the name by now, Paul Manafort, was sentenced to almost 4 years in prison for financial crimes, and his former longtime personal attorney, that being Mr. Trump's attorney, went to Capitol Hill to testify under oath about his old boss. CNN's Jim Acosta has that.
After shying away from the subject for days, President Trump took aim at his former personal attorney, Michael Cohen, accusing his one-time fixer of lying to Congress.
It's a stone-cold lie, and he's lied about a lot of things, but when he lied about the pardon, that was really a lie, and he knew all about pardons. His lawyers said that they went to my lawyers and asked for pardons.
The president is referring to this comment Cohen made last week under oath when he testified that he had not sought a pardon from Mr. Trump, even though his own attorneys had done just that.
And I have never asked for, nor would I accept, a pardon from President Trump.
The president went one step further, alleging Cohen had sought a pardon personally, tweeting, "Bad lawyer and fraudster Michael Cohen said under sworn testimony that he had never asked for a pardon. His lawyers totally contradicted him. He lied. Additionally, he directly asked me for a pardon. I said no." Cohen fired back, tweeting, "Just another set of lies by the president. Mr. President, let me remind you that today is International Women's Day. You may want to use today to apologize for your own lies and dirty deeds to women like Karen McDougal and Stephanie Clifford," a reference to Mr. Trump's alleged mistresses. But the president's attack on Cohen could backfire, pulling Mr. Trump into a perjury investigation into his former personal attorney's remarks.
We'd love to hear from the president about it. It does seem like one of these whimsical last-minute presidential inventions.
Contrast Mr. Trump's war of words with Cohen with the sympathy expressed for his former campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, who is headed to prison, but may receive a pardon of his own as he stayed loyal to the president.
I feel very badly for Paul Manafort. I think it's been a very, very tough time for him. But if you notice, both his lawyer, a highly respected man, and a very highly respected judge, the judge said there was no collusion with Russia. This had nothing to do with collusion. There was no collusion. It's a collusion hoax. It's a collusion witch hoax.
Just before the president viewed storm damage in Alabama, the White House announced its communications director, Bill Shine, is resigning. Sources tell CNN Mr. Trump had soured on Shine, questioning his judgment on a number of issues. Still, the president released a statement saying, "We will miss Shine in the White House, but look forward to working together on the 2020 presidential campaign, where he will be totally involved." Shine, a former Fox News executive, is the sixth person to take on the communications job, raising questions about the president's commitment to hire the best people.
We're going to get the best people in the world. We're going to use our smartest and our best. We're not using political hacks anymore.
The president may need a new communications director to help spin the latest unemployment numbers, showing the economy only added 20,000 jobs last month. Still, the president said there's nothing to worry about.
The economy is very, very strong. If you look at the stock market over the last few months, it's been great.
The president is looking to put Democrats on the defensive, accusing them of going soft on Congresswoman Ilhan Omar after the House passed a measure condemning hate speech, a move sparked by the freshman Democrats' anti-Semitic comments.
The Democrats have become an anti-Israel party. They've become an anti-Jewish party.
But the president overlooked his own record.
And you had some very bad people in that group. But you also had people that were very fine people on both sides.
As for the departure of the communications director over here, a source close to the White House said there were growing concerns about the administration's cozy relationship with Fox News, where Bill Shine was recently a top executive. Shine was partly responsible for the dramatic reduction in press briefings with reporters. Jim Acosta, CNN, the White House.
Let's talk about the goings-on at the White House. Leslie Vinjamuri is in London for us. She's the head of the U.S. and America's program at Chatham House think tank and a frequent guest. Leslie, thanks for being with us this morning.
Thank you.
Well, the president seemed to indicate a victory is somewhat over the Manafort sentencing regarding no collusion. But we all know now Manafort wasn't on trial for collusion. How, in your opinion, is the president handling the outcome of the Manafort story?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that, the Manafort story is very interesting. The president's response is certainly revealing, but I think there is this broader question also of the sentencing, and that's what a lot of the public reaction and response has been to, whether that, the length of the sentencing was fair or not, and a perception really that it was far shorter than the parameters that have been recommended.
Right, many talking about light sentences handed down to white collar crimes. However, Manafort will face yet another judge on different charges. He'll be sentenced again. So wait and see what happens there, correct?
It is wait and see, and I think the other thing to note here also is, the concerns are, of course, about equity in the criminal justice system. But the Washington Post reports today that if you actually look at white-collar crimes, bank fraud, that Manafort's sentencing is actually within the range of normal, so that there is a broader question of equity. It's not really perhaps Manafort specifically. It's just broader, deeper injustice in the system, which I think is very important for people to take note of.
And it was also interesting that this judge, who many had not liked the outcome and what the judge seemed to say about Manafort, almost acting like he liked him. I guess he could like him, but he's the judge, and talking about the question that Manafort never seemed to show remorse. All that he's been through with this, and he came to the court for the sentencing in a wheelchair, suffering from gout, and still not showing remorse. What's your reaction?
Yeah, I mean, the optics are very difficult. They've been very difficult on a number of dimensions for a very long time, and I think this is symbolic of that sense that there are a lot of things happening that shouldn't be happening, and without oversight, but also without remorse and reflection. So I think that was a very telling moment.
I also want to talk about Jim Acosta's story there and the back and forth between Cohen and the president on Twitter, both pointing the finger at one another, accusations of lies, questions about pardon or no pardon. It's interesting that these two were together for so long, and now they're playing this out in the public. And this is the U.S. president for all to read. What do you make of it?
Well, I mean, it is striking that we are where we are, given that it was only last week during those Cohen hearings that the president of the United States of America was meeting with the leader of North Korea, and yet the intense focus on Cohen, it demonstrates that, that back and forth is because there's a real concern about that testimony, and the effort now is to establish or to discredit the witness. So there's a real question of, the credibility of Michael Cohen. And this is what we're seeing back and forth, not only between Cohen and Trump, but more generally. And so there is a question of whether or not he's lying. There's also a question here of whether the president is planning to use pardons more generally, and whether he has at times tried to use that in order to undermine the independence of the investigation, the various investigations that are going on. So the back and forth is not surprising, it's disturbing. But again, it all goes to this broader question and the broader politics surrounding the credibility of Michael Cohen.
We always appreciate your insights. Leslie Vigil-Murray for us. Thank you.
Thank you.
The U.S. president is slamming Democrats after the House adopted a resolution condemning hatred and intolerance, including anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim discrimination.
And I thought that vote was a disgrace, and so does everybody else if you get an honest answer. If you get an honest answer from politicians, they thought it was a disgrace. The Democrats have become an anti-Israel party. They've become an anti-Jewish party, and that's too bad.
The resolution was written in response to what some called anti-Semitic remarks by Democratic House member Ilhan Omar. It was revised to include other forms of bigotry. 23 Republicans voted against it, arguing it did not do enough to condemn Omar by name.
The freshman Democrat is one of the first Muslim women elected to the U.S. Congress. She's been under fire, even from fellow Democrats, for criticizing Israeli government actions. She's also been the target of the anti-Muslim bias.
Venezuela's national power outage continues for a second day. The opposition and the government blaming one another for the blackout, and they're also calling
for new protests. They're set to begin in a few hours.
The two blame one another for the blackout that affected most of the country. You can tell from these satellite images just how widespread it was on the left, what the country looked like before, on the right, the aftermath, with almost all of Venezuela in darkness.
The government says it was a sabotage event. It was sabotage caused by a U.S. cyber attack on a key power plant. That's what they say. But the opposition says the government had stolen money that was earmarked for electricity. Our Patrick Ottman has this story from Caracas.
At first, Venezuelans could be forgiven for thinking it was just one more power outage. They happen here all the time. But then it went on and on. Before long, power was out in most of the country, one of the most widespread outages Venezuela has ever suffered, taking place at the same moment the socialist government battles with the U.S.-backed opposition over who should run the country. The government claimed without presenting evidence that the blackout was caused by sabotage, and the power would be back on soon.
We're working to reestablish service as soon as possible and defeat again this new attempt to black out the country and create chaos and destabilization in our country that is at peace. And I remind you, this is an attack to the government, this is an attack to the people.
Throughout the long night, Venezuelans did the best they could with what they had. Nurses at a Caracas hospital took turns squeezing manual ventilators to keep newborn babies breathing. CNN could not independently confirm the video, and when we went to the hospital, no one there wanted to speak with us. Opposition leader Juan Guaido said Venezuelans needed to make their anger known over the blackout at an anti-government protest planned for Saturday.
The whole nation is coming out to the streets. We will go back to the streets and we will not leave until we reach our goal.
Venezuelans took to the streets, but mainly to hunt down the bare necessities. You need electricity to pump gas, and this is the only station that we've seen so far that has its own generator. So people have lined up all the way down this street and all the way around the corner to pump gas in the country that has the world's greatest oil reserves. Alejandra said she waited for 3 hours.
This is madness. We live daily in the same circumstances. There are no services, there is no food, there is no medicine. This is a crazy nation.
Even with the lights out, the message is clear for everyone to see. Venezuela is falling apart. Patrick Ottman, CNN Caracas.
The newborn baby of the so-called ISIS bride, Shamima Begum, has died. That according to the Kurdish Red Crescent. Begum left the UK 4 years ago to join ISIS, but now says she wants to return home, even though she doesn't regret leaving.
The British government revoked her citizenship, so she couldn't return, but she is fighting the decision. She was living in a Syrian refugee camp when she gave birth last month. In the meantime, the fight to extinguish the ISIS caliphate is grinding down. In the past 48 hours, at least 2,600 people, including ISIS fighters, have left the last village controlled by ISIS.
The U.S.-backed Syrian Democratic Forces have been fighting since mid-February to retake the enclave in eastern Syria. Of course, that fight goes on still. CNN is partnering with young people worldwide for a day of action against modern-day slavery, March 14th, leading the charge students around the world. And we're asking them, what makes you feel free? Here are some of the answers from students at the American Community School in Abu Dhabi.
What makes you feel free? What makes me feel free is when I could do something that people call a boy thing or a girl thing and not feel bad about it. I feel free when no one has to tell me who I have to be and when I can be myself always.
I feel free because I have family that loves me and that supports me, that I can come to school and learn and have friends.
Join us March 14th to celebrate #MyFreedomDay
and to eradicate child slavery.
And we invite you to tell the world what makes you feel free. Share your story using the hashtag #MyFreedomDay.
Well, President Trump made a stop in Lee County, Alabama on Friday. Back-to-back tornadoes devastated the area last week, killing at least 23 people and injuring dozens more. This weekend, nearly 15 million people across the southern U.S. are under a severe storm threat.
Our meteorologist Derek Van Dam is here to tell us more about the storms. Derek.
You know, one of the reasons that tornado in Lee County was so destructive is because it was on the ground for over 70 miles.
That's
just incredible amount of time, incredible amount of distance, throwing debris and obviously causing fatalities as well. I want to summarize what happened last weekend because it's relevant to what we're going to speak about for this particular weekend. On average, we see about 5 tornadoes in the state of Alabama, Georgia, and about 6 into Florida. Just in one day alone last weekend, we saw 37 tornadoes across 4 states. In the entire month of March, we only see about 78 tornadoes on average, so we have almost gotten to 50% of our average tornado monthly frequency, and it's not even the middle middle of the month just yet. So today, the potential exists for more tornadoes, this time just a little further to the north and west from the areas that were hit so hard last weekend near the border of Alabama and Georgia. So we're going to focus our attention across Mississippi into western sections of Tennessee. More on that in just one second. The current situation is interesting because the radar here has gotten extremely active. In fact, the National Weather Service has just issued a severe thunderstorm watch stretching from northern Texas right through Springfield, Missouri. A large hail, possible damaging winds, gusts of over 70 miles per hour. Tornadoes possible within this watch box. But as we focus our attention later this afternoon and evening, we get to the daytime heating of the middle of our days. Basically anywhere from northern Mississippi into western Tennessee and southwestern Kentucky. That's where we expect this line of thunderstorms to produce strong, potentially tornadic developing thunderstorms that has the potential to cause some damage as well. That line of storms will weaken, move further to the south and east, and we'll focus our attention on Sunday for southern Georgia and southern Alabama as well. And by the way, lots of snow for places in the north, including Minneapolis, up to a foot today.
All right.
Eric, thank you.
All right, guys.
Still ahead, President Trump expresses sympathy for his former campaign chairman after he's sentenced to prison.
I feel very badly for Paul Manafort. I think it's been a very, very tough time for him.
But a second sentencing next week could put Manafort away for a very long time.
Also ahead here, CNN goes to what's described as BB country to hear from the base that's staying loyal to embattled Israeli Prime Minister